What's up, guys? It's Toby Rosario, and in today's video, I'm super excited. I have the OG, Cris Chico, the inventor. You guys probably heard of the term virtual wholesaling. This is the guy who created it. This is the guy who pioneered direct mail. He kind of changed the game, and I'm super excited that I have him on my channel today to discuss his story and talk about what's working for him today. So thank you so much, Cris, for being on here today.
I appreciate that. You know, what happens is I look at the word OG, and it's a nice way of saying that I'm an old guy. But it's good. I'm good. I'm happy to be here. I appreciate you having me on board, and I'm excited for us having a chat here today.
Now the roles are reversed. You're usually the one interviewing people on your channel. Now I'm interviewing you.
That's right.
So for the people who don't really know your story, kind of talk about how you got started in real estate, what you were doing before real estate, and go from there.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm trying to think about how to. You want me to start from the womb when I was born? And no, just kidding. So I mean, I got started. I have a degree in accounting. Some people know that, some people don't. I grew up in Puerto Rico. We lived with when I grew up in Puerto Rico, we had no running water. No, I remember going to the outhouse and allowing at least a few seconds for the cockroaches to scurry away. I moved to Connecticut. Most people don't know that I originally lived in Connecticut, and then eventually made my way here to South Florida. And I went to school, got a degree in accounting, and in the end, I started off as a real estate agent. I was a real estate agent. I was a horrible real estate agent. I used to drive this. I remember the old Knight Rider.
Yeah.
Okay, I used to have that car with like the headers removed, so it sounded like the Indy 500 was outside your house when I drove up. And I weighed 140 pounds with a briefcase. Back in the days, I was thinking about this the other day. Like, remember, we used to go to Office Depot and buy briefcases. Now, they're nowhere to be found. What happened to the briefcases? What if I want one of them? So I started off as an agent. I did really poorly as an agent. And it's partly because, although I'm here talking to you, and I may seem like, hey, Cris is a personable guy, and he can sell and everything else. I was a horrible salesperson because I was the kind of salesperson that I would spend the entire day organizing my leads, and then finally wait till like 4:30 in the afternoon to call some of them, hoping that they wouldn't answer the phone so I can put them on the next day's agenda to call, right? Yeah. And so by circumstance, a friend of mine just got me into the REO market. So I became an agent for REO companies. When they took the property and they foreclosed on it, I was one of the guys that went out and secured it, sold it, the whole thing. And I did that for a couple of years. And even though I was an agent in that arena, I didn't really know what was happening behind the scenes. There was a particular investor that was buying most of my deals. And then I figured out kind of just like what he was doing. And one day he said, hey, would you want to come work for me under my wing and learn this business? And luckily, I was kind of contemplating it, and I talked to a friend of mine at the time, and he said, look, if you don't go and do this, I'm going to personally come down and I'm going to kick your ass if you don't take advantage of this. So I did. And so I worked with him as a year as a mentor, as him, I made money for him. I mean, he made hundreds and hundreds, millions of dollars. I made like 50, 60 grand that year, but I got the experience that normally somebody would get over a period of a couple of years. I got that in like 1 year. And then I decided to go on my own. And at the time when I was helping him, most of the deals we were getting were from REO properties, meaning I was, talking with real estate agents and securing deals that way. And I didn't like that. I felt that, I didn't like the fact that you had to kiss a lot of frogs. You had to be nice to them. You had to put up with their bullshit because you wanted their deals, right? And that wasn't for me. And so I started down the path of trying to figure out how can I go out and find motivated sellers privately, right, without having to go through that process. And what ended up happening is, like everybody else, I bought a bunch of courses, just trying to figure stuff out. And what helped me was there was a book that I picked up from a guy named Dan Kennedy. And he's an internet marketer. He's a real OG when it comes to marketing. Yeah. And I picked up a book called The Ultimate Sales Letter. And that helped me understand, hey, what makes a good advertisement? What makes something really work well? And I started to play around with that. And at the time, everybody knows now Click-to-Mail. Back then, it was called Net Post Digital Online, and it was like really quirky. It was the most horrible thing to work in. But nobody's using it. So I went in and I started, doing postcards and letters, but I was doing what everybody else is doing, which is, you know, hey, we buy houses cash and everything else, and nothing was working. And then what ended up happening is that through the study of his book, I started to come up with postcards that like told the story. You know, like, hey, one of my cards was called the attention card that said, hey, I was driving around the area and I happened to drive by and I saw your property and the postcards, I started to inject like the variable inside, like, you know, hey, the property address and the owner. Nobody at that time was doing that. And then also I started to use 24-hour recorded messages, which again, in our industry, nobody was using it. And everybody thought, well, this is crazy. This is not going to work. And it did work. You know, and the story for me was that I went from, you know, I was barely eking by. And then all of a sudden, when I figured out how to do the postcards effectively with the list and everything else, I went from basically making no money to 6 months later, I made like, I remember I made like 110,000. It was like June when really things started to take off that year. And then in January of the following year, I made $110,000 in a single month, which is more than I ever made like before, period. And like that was the big thing that got me going. And you know, one of the things that I realized about myself is that I'm really not a great salesperson. I procrastinate. I don't like talking to people on the phone. And so very quickly, I was pretty much running it where I was the behind the scenes guy doing all the marketing because I knew how to do everything. And then I ended up just getting other people to do the acquisition side of it. Just because I didn't like to do it. And nothing like we have today, because we had a lot of guys that have a big business, et cetera, you know, with acquisitions person. But that was me out of necessity. And then, you know, I got into the education business. And I remember, you know, I don't want to say who it was, but, you know, back then, I got bit by the internet bug, you know, as we all do. Yeah. And back then, everybody, whenever you bought a real estate course, they gave you this DVD and CD and stuff like that. And I was like, well, I don't want to do all this. I don't want to, you know, this takes too much time. And I said, you know, I looked and I figured out, hey, I can just take what happened is I had a bunch of tutorials that I had for my staff on how to do all these things. And I just said, well, I'm just going to upload them to a membership site and do that. I remember talking to one of a guru that we would all know. And he's like, oh, that's crazy, man. Everybody wants books and tapes. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do books and tapes. And I did that. And that's how I got into the education business. And, you know, back then it was interesting because we were doing postcards. Nobody was doing postcards. Because I was really the only one doing it in that way. And, you know, we would send out 1,000 postcards. And if we didn't pick up 2 or 3 deals, we'd think something is wrong. I mean, you know, we had it really good. And we were even calling the hangups back. I mean, I just imagine how much money we lost by not calling the hangups. And then what happened is that the market started to tank here in the South Florida area. But I knew that other people were doing deals in other parts of the country. So then I started to do some research, and I said, well, I can just send direct mail to another area. I mean, what's stopping me from doing that? And I started to do that. And the missing piece of the puzzle for me was the fact that, okay, well, I can get the deals, but in my local area, I have all these buyers. How am I going to find these buyers? Yeah. And so then what I ended up figuring out was at the time that, hey, if we look at an absentee owner list, we're targeting the people that own the property for the longest period of time. Well, the people that just bought just bought those properties as an absentee owner, those are our buyers. Right. And so I was really one of the first guys to kind of figure that out. There's other guys that now have done it, you know, with software and everything else, but all that stuff was manual. And then lo and behold, then I started doing deals virtually. And then, you know, I came up with that name. You know, it's funny because I was thinking of a way to describe what I was doing. And literally, this is a true story. One day in the middle of the night, 1 o'clock in the morning, I get up, I wake up and I think of the name Virtual Wholesaling. And I swear to God, I got up, went and registered the domains and registered it, and then went back to bed. And that's how the name came up. And then it became, you know, a common thing. And so what happened is that, you know, there's iterations of the postcards, right? Then I came up with the blind copy cards, I think, which is the ones that you've mailed out. You've mailed out the blind copy cards, right? But I mailed out the blind copy. I started the blind copy cards. The reason I started that is because I was going to the UPS store, right? And there were a couple other investors that were having their direct mail come back as a return mail. But the people there, they don't know the difference, in the cards. They all look yellow postcards, right? They're like, and so I would get the cards and I would be like, oh, this is mine. And I'm like, what is this? It looks like my card, right? But it's somewhat different, like a Frankenstein version of my card. And then what happened is that I was gonna say, hopefully you don't mind me swearing. Some asshole decided to publish a course on postcards, and now everybody was sending out the same cards. And I said, well, what am I gonna do, right? So it's almost like I taught the material, but I also suffered from the saturation of it. So then I came up with a blind copy cards, which is a card that doesn't say anything at all. And then owner gets it, and the only thing they can do is call the phone number on the card. So that was like the third notice card, the property notification card. And my thought process was that, look, if all I did was get them to pick up the phone and I can at least get them to dial into the phone system, then it would be like fishing. At least I'd have them and I could reel them in because I have the phone number. So it's funny because now I think that was like skip tracing 0.1. Because now you get the list of owners and you skip trace it. But that was like my way of skip tracing, right? Just to get them to call the phone number. And then this is about a year and a half ago, about 2 years ago, we started to spend a lot of money in direct mail. And we started spending a lot more money in direct mail. We just weren't getting the results.
Sorry to cut you off. How much were you spending in direct mail like 2 years ago?
I mean, I was probably sending out like 15 to 20,000 postcards. And then so what happened is that I knew that from, talking to other friends, with direct mail, you might send 5,000. If you might send 5,000, you send 10,000, you'll get more. 15, you get more. But you're going to hit a point of diminishing returns, that if you're sending out 20 to 25, you can send out 50, 60,000, you're not going to get like a multiplier of what you're already doing. So I knew that sending out more mail wasn't the answer. And so I was trying to think of like, hey, where can I go next? Where is the sweet spot? Cold calling, I had tried. You and I had just had a discussion about this. It wasn't for me. When I was a real estate agent, I did a lot of cold calling. I got like the office to give me a phone when I had this 2 headset thing going on with a band, and I got the company and I made this contraption. I would be calling 2 phones. Like we didn't have an auto dialer. We had me and my hands calling people, but it wasn't for me, right? And then I hired someone to do the cold calling. But what happened is that then we were getting people to say, oh, I just had like a call or 2 calls from someone this week on the same property. And so I was like, oh shit, this ain't gonna work, right? It's just like postcards, except now I have the agony of having to call people on the phone all day long. And then, so I knew that, sellers were online. I had thought about PPC, but the problem with PPC is that it was now a mature market. That I knew friends that were doing PPC that told me, look, unless you're willing to spend $7,500, $10,000 a month on PPC, and they were telling me that they were paying $200, $300, $400 a lead, I was like, that's the only way to get in the game. And so for me, that was that wasn't a possibility. And for me, Facebook seemed like the right answer. And now, in the past, I had done Facebook before, but Facebook has transitioned where now the platform is more robust. And, it's funny because then I think about like, now this is a statistic that Facebook holds the largest demographic, is the largest place for you to have access to the demographic between 50 to 80-year-olds, which is our prospects, right? The older people. And, my mom uses Facebook. My mom thinks the internet is Facebook. So I'm like, shit, if my mom is on Facebook, then maybe our sellers are on Facebook. So I went in and I got a bunch of courses on Facebook because I hadn't done it in a while. And I started to work through those. I started to listen to a bunch of different podcasts, and I went on YouTube and everything else to figure out what other people are doing. And I tried to do that with Facebook, but I just wasn't getting anywhere. And so I took a step back and I said, hey, what worked with the postcards? What worked with the postcards is not coming across as, hey, we buy houses cash like everybody else was coming and approaching it a different way. And, I know that, hey, I personalize the postcards to fit the property and the owner. And I thought to myself, well, how can we personalize the ads to be more like, an individual kind of conversation? And through a couple of different iterations, then finally figured out, a model that worked for Facebook ads. And now, my primary strategy for lead generation, the primary thing that really I try to focus the students on is on Facebook ads and learning that platform and generating motivated seller leads. And also from the perspective of, I think that, regardless of what you're doing, I think everyone should learn the platform. I don't care if you decide that, Chico, I hate the sound of your voice. I hate the fact that your head is all shiny under the lights. I cannot stand the sight of you. Go somewhere else. But you have to learn how to use Facebook and the platform because it's here. I mean, I have students that buy my Facebook course, and then they decide, you know what, I got a lawn business. I'm going to take what Chico taught me. I'm going to use it for my lawn business. And now they're taking that business. So I just think that in general, it's an advantage for anyone out there to learn the platform. And, for me, I'm using it for real estate investing. And that's my primary focus. Some direct mail. I recommend direct mail for like really niche lists. So if you're going after tax delinquent, code violations, etc. And we can talk about that. And I also recommend like a 3-pronged strategy, meaning that if you're going to get the tax delinquent list, you can hit that list 3 ways. You can hit it with direct mail, cold calling, and also Facebook, and really target in on those prospects. But man, I just realized I have gone on, and so I need to overtake the call. This guy Chico has a lot of information, but hard to get a word in.
That's why you're on here, because you have a lot of information. So let's back up a little bit here. So how long did it take you to find some sort of traction with the Facebook ads when you first started? Because I know it's a little bit, so if you're new to the platform, it can take a little while to kind of learn how it works, and you got to do a lot of testing. So how long did it take you to see some traction, get some leads?
Well, I mean, I look at it in stages. First is learning the platform to begin with. I think a lot of times, and this, sometimes you might spend 15 minutes looking for something on Facebook because you're like, I know where that is. I just can't seem to find it. It helps you because now you learn where everything else is in the platform. So there's first of all, the understanding of how everything works, right? The number one. So, that was fairly easy, right? Because you can mechanically get through that. The difficult part was probably, it was about a good, for me, it was about a couple months because of the fact that it was just me spending money and not getting anywhere, coming back to the drawing board and trying to figure stuff out. It's helpful that I know, I know how to write copy and I know certain things about internet marketing, et cetera. So that kind of accelerated the process for me. But there was definitely a lot of trial and error, and even to this day, whenever I publish anything to the course, I only publish it because I've tested it and I know it works. So there's still a lot of testing, and, Facebook changes all the time. But I think that you have to look at the platform as whenever you're spending money, obviously you're spending money to find deals, but you're also spending money to buy data, to buy intelligence, to figure out where you're going to make your adjustments. And you have to be okay with that. It's because sometimes you might run a campaign and not make any money. But I think going back to your question, it took about a month. I would say it took about, it took about a month for me to go through all the Facebook courses that I went through. I went to 3 or 4 and they're general Facebook courses, and to learn the platform. And then another couple months just to get to a point where I'm like, oh shit, I got a lead. I think I might have something here that works. So maybe about 3 months in total.
So what are you finding? How many leads is it taking you from Facebook to close one deal? Like how many leads?
I give you a general rule of thumb. The general rule of thumb I give students is if you're paying an average of $30 a lead, right, that you should look at generating 50 leads to find a deal, right? So if you think about it, that's 1,500. Now there's a lot of variables in that, because one variable is, hey, what's your competency in speaking with sellers? Because I can generate 50 leads, and despite my horribleness of being a salesperson and procrastinating, if you're just starting out brand new, there's a chance that I might be able to do something with these people before you get, you might need 100, right? Because you're not that great on the phone. The second part is the other variable is understanding whether or not you have a deal or not. You and I spoke about that I got a couple of people in our group together that are doing ads, and a less experienced person and a more experienced person. And the more experienced person looked at the less experienced person leads that they threw away, that they thought were dead leads. And he said, what are you doing? Like, these are deals. And now they put together some deals that one of them is potentially a really big deal, which if they make that deal, I'm going to tell them, you have to fly me to your market and put me up and treat me to a steak dinner. But, so, that has something to do with it. You could find a deal, right? And you can put a deal together and put it on the contract, and then you don't sell it because you don't have a robust buyers list. So there's a lot of variables there. But as a general rule of thumb, that's my general rule of thumb. You got to be willing to give Facebook some money to be able to figure this thing out. And 30 leads at $30 a lead, 50 leads, that's 1,500. Some people get deals and get traction with less. We've had some people get their first deal with only a couple $100. Some people may spend 2,000 or 2,500, right? Because they got a lot of other stuff they got to figure out in order to make that happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And let me just say this, guys. I purchased Cris Chico's course, and here's a couple of reasons why I purchased his course. Number one, like I said, if you listen to the interview from the beginning, he's a pioneer. So wherever Cris is going, you better follow, because and I think you talk about it a lot in your other videos and interviews. There's a small window of opportunity before it gets oversaturated.
Right.
So I think right now, like you talk about, it's a perfect time to get into Facebook because it's not saturated. I don't know many people in my market. I only know probably one or two that are doing it. And right now it's not saturated. Number three, I think, like we talk about off the air, it's a bit of a learning curve. And I think that deters a lot of people following through because there's a lot of testing. You got to learn the platform. You got to have the right image. You got to have the right copy. So it's a lot of variables that come into testing as opposed to direct mail. You just upload the list, you go to the mail house, or skip tracing, you get a list, you skip tracing, you cold call, right?
Right.
All the dollars. But Facebook, I like it. The reason I purchased it, number one, because Cris is I got to follow what Cris is doing because he knows what's working. And also, it's just not saturated at all. I've gotten some leads. I just started a couple campaigns, and I've gotten some leads. And I went on an appointment. It didn't turn into a deal, but I went on an appointment, and the guy hasn't received any phone calls or anything like that. So those are the deals where you're going to make a lot of money, and this is the way to try to capitalize before it gets oversaturated. Eventually, some people are going to come in and start to saturate the market, but you're going to be ahead of the curve compared to those people. So that's why, if you could add to that, why Facebook is so good right now, because I know you said that's all you're focusing on. Right?
Well, I mean, it's a combination. I mean, the other thing I want to mention is whenever you're picking a strategy, I always think about, it has to be something, whatever strategy you pick, has to be something that you like to do, that you feel that you could do, right? That's number one. Number two is you have to understand what's required for that particular strategy. So as an example, for that strategy to be successful. So in terms of something you like, and I said this before in a couple of interviews, I like one strategy that I implemented back in the days that was horrible was door driving. Right. And door driving is where you get a list of properties because you want to do door knocking. But however, when you start driving, you're too chicken shit to knock on the door. So you just drive. And a very ineffective way to find deals. But, I don't like cold calling. I've always been a fan of trying to figure out a way for prospects to come to me. Right. To be able to, so I can handle them on my time versus being on the phone all day and that sort of thing. And so for me, that's why Facebook resonates with me. And I think if you have a full-time job, it might be difficult for you to sit all day and do cold calling, or it's going to be sporadic versus if you have, a paid media such as the Facebook, then, you could run the ads, you can monitor them from work. When somebody submits their form, you try to get back to them, you can text message them. So there's a lot of flexibility there, number one. The other thing is understanding the requirements necessary for any particular marketing medium to be successful. So, for example, I had somebody recently that reached out to me on Messenger and said, "Look, Chico, I'm doing direct mail, but it's not, I'm just struggling with it." I said, "Well, how many postcards have you mailed out?" And they said they mailed out 1,000 postcards to a general absentee owner list. And my response was, you got to be prepared to send minimum of 1,000 a week. Right. Maybe even 2,000 a week over a period of 60 days to get some traction with an absentee owner mailing of that sort. Just because, so in that scenario, that person has the right, has the right idea, but they don't know what they're walking themselves into. They don't know that they're going to run out of money potentially before they have a chance for that strategy to even take hold. The cold calling is the same thing. Somebody says, hey, I did cold calling, and I don't know if it's, I don't think it's working. I said, how many hours did you cold call? They said, well, I cold call 5 hours total, and I'm like, you're not even like scratching the surface. Like, you're not even in the game. Like, it's like you haven't even got the car out of the garage. You need to, like, come back to me when you tell me you have 30 hours of cold calling. Right?
And the thing is, I'm sorry, is everything works, right? It's just how long you work it, and like you said, what you're getting into. Like, if you're doing direct, you got to send out a lot of direct mail in order to see some traction. You got to do a lot of cold calling. The ringless voicemail, you got to send a lot of ringless voicemails. So everything works. It's just, what you got to know what you're getting yourself into, what it takes, or what's required in order to get some traction.
Right. And the way I look at it is, I was gonna say a couple of things about that. Is that my recommendation for anyone here is that I always recommend you focus on one strategy, right? You do the best you can to do your due diligence to figure out what the strategy is going to need from you in terms of time, money, etc. And you focus on one thing and you own that. You learn that like the back of your hand, and you become an expert in that. Because for most of you, to get your first 2 or 3 deals done, I look at it in stages. If you have not done a deal before, then the first objective is getting your first 2 to 3 deals done, period. I don't care how much those deals are. If you make $1,000 a deal, it doesn't matter to me. Because when you do that, now you understand the business. By the time you've done your 3rd deal, even if you made $1,000 on each deal, it doesn't matter. You understand now fundamentally how the business operates. In addition to that, to get to those 2 or 3 deals, you have to implement one strategy in order to be able to make that success. So to be able to do that. So now you have the foundation. Now it's a matter of expanding and then repetition. Then at that point, then the most I would recommend is maybe having 2 strategies. I think for most people, they can accomplish a consistent 2 to 3 deals a month flow with just 2 strong lead generation strategies. And that's my recommendation. Like for me, I don't do RVMs. I've never considered RVMs because I'm in Florida. It's really a touchy situation, and nothing's wrong with RVM, but I happen to think that that's there's going to be laws that can be passed, and it's an opportunity. Like, you hit it hard while you can. Be careful with it. At some point, it's going to be like faxing. You used to be able to send out thousands of faxes to random numbers, and now you can't do that anymore. You get into legal trouble. But I think that in my decision-making process, I think about digital marketing and online marketing and how just things are continuing to move in that direction. And so from a perspective of opportunity and a perspective of establishing a strong foundation for you in your business, I think for me, that's why I select that. That's why I'm so heavy on the Facebook.
Right. And I want to talk about, you talk about this sometimes in the interview. You see all these big wholesalers, nothing wrong with that. They do $2, $3, $4 million a year. They have this big team. Talk about your thought process. And I know you kind of scaled back. You're kind of a small team. Talk about why you decided to do that, and why you don't want to be one of these big wholesalers who are doing 20, 30, 40 deals a month. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, everybody has different. I was talking about this with a good friend of mine, Todd Toback, and I think a mentor of mine always said this to me. He says, "Look, you got to be mindful when you look at somebody else's business." And I say this. I'm going to answer your question, but I'm going to use this as a recommendation for anybody listening here. Is that there's a difference between front stage and backstage. Front stage is, everybody. You always have to think about the fact that you're looking at everybody's Instagram version of their life. Okay, you don't see all the bad stuff that's happening. You don't see all the negative or anything like that. You just see the Instagram version of what everybody else wants you to see. And so many times you are making decisions about what you're going to do based on someone's front stage, based on just what you see, but you don't know behind the scenes what's going on. I've talked to people that out there are doing that. We're doing 15 deals a month, 20 deals a month, and for all intents and purposes, you could say, oh, gee, that's the kind of business I want. Let me go out and exactly replicate what they're doing. But you didn't know. I knew because they told me, but you didn't know that they were basically making like 10 grand a month when all said and done. Like, they were just squeaking by. And so I think that you have to be mindful of when you follow advice, understanding where that person is relative to where you're at. Because the other part of it is that if you're looking at, say, people come to me all the time and says, Chico, I want to learn how to scale and get a VA and grow my business. I'm like, well, how many deals have you done? They say, no deals. I said, what the fuck? What are you talking about? Like, there's no scale. Like, you get out of here, leave, because this is like completely. For some, if you're starting out, and I'm not saying, so be mindful of the advice you're getting relative to where that person is, because at the end of the day, you might be better off getting advice from somebody who's just doing a couple deals a month, because that's all you want. You just want to get traction, and then you can expand from there. And for me, it's a little bit different in the sense that I have a couple of things going on, right? So for me, I have the real estate business, I have the education business, and so I make money from both, right? The real estate business, I intentionally run it small, because at the same time it's also a testing ground. So anytime I give anything to a student, anytime I give you an ad to run, it's because I've run it, right? And I've deliberately run that. So I do a couple of things in that, I do deals here locally. Recently, I do marketing in different areas of the state, and I recently sent some leads over to Tom Kroll in his market, because I ran some ads as testing ads and I generated leads, but I don't have anything in that market, so I give it to them, and we work out a referral fee. So my model is a little bit different than somebody I think that would be only doing wholesaling. And I don't want to. I want to also make sure that I say this, is that I'm not knocking anyone that is doing that kind of volume, because I have a big business. At the end of the day, if you've got a $5 million business and you've got all this, all the staff and all this team, and at the end, you should have a good bottom line, regardless, right? You make good money. So I think that there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that if you have to figure out what stage are you at in your business, and make sure that you focus on what's required for your stage. Not look at, hey, this guy, if you haven't done a deal before, don't come talk to me about scaling. Like, you got to get your first deal. I mean, come on. Yeah. I'm sure you get that, right? People say that.
Oh my God. Like, let me hire this VA. You haven't done anything yet. But like, start making some calls, start generating some leads, start going on appointments. I'm trying to outsource everything. And just to kind of add to what you said, I think it's important too to kind of have clarity and think with the end goal in mind. Like, do you want this big operation, to what you were saying, or do you want something that can close 3 to 5 deals a month, $10,000, $12,000 assignment fees on average, and live the lifestyle? And you're gonna net a lot of that, because you're not gonna have a big staff, right? The bottom line is gonna be really good. You're not gonna have all these sales teams and acquisition guys and all these things. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and you also have to look at, like, for me, everybody's individual in that. I consider myself more of a marketing guy, right, versus a real estate investor. I know real estate investor. I've done hundreds and thousands of transactions, but I mean, I don't know how to do creative financing. There's a lot of other real estate investors that can run circles around me. The one thing that I can do well is I can figure out the marketing, right? So I would rather figure out the marketing, figure out a way to then generate the leads, get other people to help me with those leads. I make money from that, and I get to do what I want to do, right? I get to spend time. So I say that from the perspective of, like, you have to look at me and say, well, gee, I know how Chico likes to operate. I know what he's good at. So now that's the reason why he runs things the way he does, right? Versus having a big operation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So last couple questions here before we wind down. I'm going to pivot here a little bit, Cris, and not talk real estate, just general stuff here. So what's the best advice you ever received?
The best advice that I've ever received. That's a good question. I'm trying to think about, I don't know. I think that the best advice, that's a tough question. I would tell you that, why don't I tell you some of the things I've been thinking about right now, that it's kind of like, I don't know where they're coming from. They might be internal, but I had this conversation with myself today, because I'm the only one that listens to myself. So I talk to myself often, in that, all of us, this is for me, I'm struggling the same way that anyone else is struggling. Like, you're struggling to get to the next level. I'm struggling to get to the next level. Maybe my next level is a little bit different than yours, but in the end, I'm still trying to make more money. I'm still trying to, get a better lifestyle. I'm trying to change certain things about myself. And, you know, the best advice I got was from a mentor of mine who in order to, you know, there's a particular model of achievement that most of us follow in the beginning, which is the do have be model. The do have be model is that you say to yourself, well, if I do all these things, then I'm going to eventually make all this money. And then when I make all this money, I'm going to have all these things. You know, I'm going to have the admiration of people. I'm going to have the house I always wanted. And I'll finally be that person that I've always wanted to be. Right. And that's a flawed model, because many times when you use that model, that's why you have so many people that eventually have tremendous success. And then they say, you know, wow, is this all there is? You know, they feel empty. And so the opposite of that model is the be do have model, right? Which then means that you become the person today, right? That can do all those things that you need to do, right? And then when you do that, then you'll have everything you want. But it's the being person that comes first, not the doing. And so the best advice I got on that is around that, is the fact that, and the conversation I've been having with myself is that you have to be willing to the person that got you here today is not the person that's going to get you to where you're going to go. And the person you are today is your security blanket. You know, I gave the analogy of you know, your way of getting to where you are today is your parachute. You jump off a cliff, you have this parachute, you've been using it all this time. Every so often things go a little bit nutty, but you know, you understand how to work it. But to a certain extent, you have to put on a new parachute that you've never used before, which means that you internally, I'm going to be me, but I have to be willing to almost destroy and kill every other part of me, because I have to step into another way of being, another way of looking at the world, another way of interacting with people, of operating, of seeing opportunities, so that I can get to the next level. And so that's the thing that I've been thinking about lately, is that, you know, there has to be a metamorphosis, like a phoenix rising.
Like a transformation.
Exactly, transformation. And I got that from a coach of mine, a combination of Rich Sheffrin and Joseph Riggio, talking about transformation. And a lot of times we're all trying to change ourselves by doing iterations. You're modifying this, you're tweaking that, where you really have to just, you're where you are today, but what got you here is not going to get you there. You've heard that before, but that means that you got to just strip away everything and become a different person. Recently, I've been looking at acting, because if you think about acting, you know, if you look at there's a website called masterclass.com, and they have courses, a variety of different things. And one of them is these guys like Samuel Jackson and everything else on acting. And if you think about an actor is taking a role of somebody and becoming that person for that period of time. Some actors do you know, become that person for like days and months, right? Because they want to get into that role. And that's the thing that has piqued my interest, because to a certain extent, that's what we have to do. We have to look at what's the life that we want to live, and who is the person that lives that life, and we have to transform ourselves to do that. And, you know, there's different methods of doing that. So anyway, that's a very long-winded answer to your question.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Chris. Last question.
Yes.
What's one question you always wanted to answer but have never been asked?
The one question that I've always wanted to
answer. Never been asked.
Never been asked. I don't know. That's a good question.
Like, think about it. Like, what questions you think people should be asking you, but they never ask? You can't think about it. It's okay. I know it's a tough question.
That's a tough question. I'm thinking about like what questions I would want to ask. You know, I mean, I don't have any. I mean, I think that I think in general people don't ask the right questions, and they hear what they want to hear. And at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that I may be sitting across the table from you, and you may think that I got everything figured out, but in the end, I don't. I got as much fucked up shit going on in my head that you got, okay? I would argue maybe more, right? And we're all going through the same. It's just different. And I think that most people, you know, obviously people are guarded. You know, you don't want to reveal your true self. I'm trying to get better at it. You and I had a conversation about a coach that I just hired to kind of help me when it comes to presence, right, on video, etc. And part of that process is being vulnerable and being okay with allowing others to see, you know, who you really are. And I think that that doesn't in any way answer the question you asked, but I figured let me just throw something out there for you. But that's a tough question.
That was it's good stuff. Great way to end it there. So where can people connect with you?
You know what? I say the easiest way, if you can connect with me, is you can go to Google, go to YouTube and go to my channel. I've got a channel as well. You just Google Cris Chico, and I'll show up with my crazy faces that I show on my videos. And got a lot of great content there now and also coming up. You've watched some of it. Got some great interviews and materials on Facebook, right?
Yeah, I'm a student. You guys should definitely subscribe. It has a great channel, very valuable information. And if you guys want to check out his course, I'll have the links below. And also just check out his channel. And like I said, he's not paying me to say this, but I am part of his course. I think it's a great course. I think you don't want to spread yourself too thin, but I think you have to understand where there's opportunity, right? And there's, you know, we talked about this in the interview. There's a small window of opportunity right now to get into Facebook because nobody's really doing it. And when people start to do it, they get deterred, they get frustrated.
Yeah.
You know, they don't see the results right away, so they just leave. So that's better for us, for the people who jump in and kind of stay, ride the wave, and take it.
We've got a good group in there too.
Yeah. Like you said, they do answer some questions. And the thing I like about Cris, you'll post a question. If someone from the group doesn't answer it, he'll make sure he answers it. He might take a day to answer it, and he does lives every Wednesday.
Yeah.
Questions live. I like that. And then also, like, you could post like screenshots of your ads. He can tell you, look, maybe you should change this, maybe you should do this differently, test this. So I like that. It's very it's kind of hands-on, like very it's like, I don't want to say he's coaching, but he'll walk you through what you're doing wrong and you can correct it along the way.
Yeah,
so.
and we got a good group of guys in there. Some people that are starting out, some people that are already doing deals, very successful. And I like how the community, I mean, I really feel it's transforming. You know, it used to be when I first started, it's just me answering questions, but it feels like now it's becoming more and more a community. And I think it is the largest group of people just focused on Facebook ads for sellers online, for real estate investors right now. Yeah, but I appreciate you bringing me on, allowing me to ramble, allowing me to just talk endlessly, right, with no end in sight. So I appreciate that.
All right, I'll have the links below.